Guys, so this session is recorded YouTube channel. If for some reason, before the end of the session, so you can go back and yeah, we can see your screen now. I said.
All right, so it seems the frame size of my frame is kind of a bit different from the presentation, so I might be adjusting a bit a couple of times. I think I designed this with my monitor, so I'm using my PC. It's tricky. But anyways, that's one major
I
trick
think you
with
can
frames.
set to width. It can fit options set to it as well. I don't know.
Let me try. Let me try that.
Width, yeah, should
Full screen.
it's working
All
already.
right.
Okay.
So basically, what are design systems and new technology design tokens? So design tokens have been here for a while, but over the course of the walkthrough, we should be able to like get a full grasp of what everything is all about. So design systems, what are they and what they mean to a designer, a team, an organization, and how do we go about them in order to achieving a world-class product? So firstly, design systems. This um, session will be broken down into two aspects: design systems and design tokens. As much as time permits us, might be a little bit of like hands-off cleanup of what we might be needing in order to optimally use a design system and in general help us manage our time and our designs as a designer. So I would start with the most basic and controversial part, and that is what is a design system is not. So a design system is not a design solution. A design is not a designer. A design system does not replace the place of design thinking. And a design system is not a that has been brought about for a product, but instead, a design system is more like Legos and building blocks that are being utilized by a designer in order to achieve a more maintainable, scalable, and consistent design. So it's just like when people talk about the tool and the user. So a design system is a tool in the hands of the designer, which is the user. No matter how good a design system is, if in the hands of the wrong user, would not generate good design solutions. So they should not be interchanged. But this time around, we'll walk around what a design system is. So a design system is a complete set of standards intended to manage designs at scale using reusable components and patterns. So a UI design has evolved over the years. Sorry. The scale speed at which UI design screens has like must be created has also increased. Not only are there millions of applications and websites, but each of those apps and websites, you might have like 100 of pages within each and every one of them. And with this drastic expansion, the need for organizations to streamline design work across a lot of teams are needed and unnecessary. So one of the major ways is to leverage on a robust design system to manage designs at scale. How does the design system help us? Design and development work can be created and replicated quickly at any scale. The primary benefit of a design system is the ability to replicate designs quickly by utilizing pre-made UI components. It alleviates and reduces the strain on design resources to focus on larger and more complex solutions and problems. So design resources can focus on, instead of tweaking of the visuals or thinking about how to structure out your visual guide, your major focus now are now prioritized on things like information prioritization, workflow optimization, user journey map, journey management, and various other design thinking practices that are necessary for your design solutions to be implemented. It creates a unified language within and between cross-functional teams, especially when you're designing responsibilities, shifts, or team becomes dispersed basically when you're working with a large team. So it helps give that unified language between your design team. So for example, when you're working with something like a drop-down menu or a text field, you do not necessarily have to start thinking about what your text field is all about, how your text field is going to be used, or the radiuses that will be used for your text field, for example, the kind of outline fill, the kind of outline stroke, all these design decisions that could cause time waste and inconsistency across, especially when there is a team of designers and not just one designer, can be mitigated completely by the use of a well structured and documented design system. So, a design system can also help and serve as an educational tool and reference and guide for junior designers and designers just coming into a team to be able to adapt to the team, adapt to the design language, and be also a contributor of that project. So your goal basically is to deliver obvious value, provide useful assets and comprehensive documentation of how, when to use each of these components in your design system. So define required HTML structure. Now, a design system, when hearing about HTML, is like the basic building blocks of design system. So a design system, first of all, is not a style guide. Neither is it a pattern library, neither is it a UI kit. It's comprised of your style guide and your pattern library. That kind of makes up your UI kit, but it moves a little bit beyond that into having proper documentation and reusable code. Because remember, the major focus is to actually scale your product and your company as fast as possible. As much as you are scaling your design speed and your design time, you also are scaling implementation speed so your products can actually be shipped out faster. So you need to be able to, as you are setting standards for the design, set it in such a way that standards for the development process can also be set with good communication between yourself and the developers. And we'll go into glimpse of that and the parts a designer has to play in this in order to ensure this scales properly. So you define required HTML structure, include production ready CSS and JavaScript, be semantic and accessible. These parts are more related to the devs, but you also see where designers kind of play in this. So make your components configurable, ensure consistency, enable faster and more consistent design and development. So what is a design system comprised of? It's comprised of your component name. Now, these are components in your design system basically. So these components, what are they comprised of? They are comprised of a name. Now, a UI component name to avoid miscommunication between designers and developers. Remember, for a good handoff process between designs and developers, handoff is basically good communication. Just like how you as let's say Kutach might speak with let's say a friend of yours, let's call maybe Ozenwa, might be different from the way you speak with me because of the established communication that is already existing between both parties. The end goal is communication, and that communication has to be established in order for good understanding to actually flow through both parties in such a way that both parties actually understand. So your component and naming structure has to be predefined and has to be in sync. Accurate description. That's a clear example and explanation for what the element is actually about, how it's to be used, and the do's and don'ts for such components. Now, your attributes. Attributes are specific needs for a particular component. For example, your colors, your shapes, the copy, the states, all these are all attributes of a particular component. Your state of a component as well too. Yeah, whether it's the default state, the hover state, the disabled state, all these are still attributes of a component that is in your design system. Then, like I said, without code, your design system isn't really complete. So you have to have your coding snippets and your front and back end frameworks. Most types design systems are usually designed not for frameworks, but with as little JavaScript as possible. in order to ensure that the design or your components are standalone as much as possible, are dumb, like they do not have as much knowledge or complications in them in terms of qualities. But the goal is to ensure that they are reusable and optimizable across dispersed teams. So you get to see teams using things like Storybook JS to use like house and host their design system. So when designing, you design for all statuses. So first state is you design for a nothing state. That is when a component, for example, a page exists, but nothing has actually.
Yeah. Okay. For your loading speeds, when you're waiting for.
Then your non-state, there's the non-states, there's one state, there's the sum state. One basically just means when you just have like entry data into it. Some when you have like a lot of data. Now that's like what a lot of designers design for. If you're designing a page, you get to like design when there is like a lot of information inside, or when you're designing a button, you get to like design probably for just your text and your button structure. But you're also meant to account for all states as well, for like your too many, in case maybe you have a left and right icon that are both active at the same time. Your done state when you have probably a checkbox that indicates that, oh, this action has been completed or is successful or is loading. Your hover state, your focus state. So all these are various states that need to be accounted for a good design system, or for a good component that will be in your design system. So now what are common myths? So here are some myths that are usually introduced to bring doubts into the effectiveness of having a design system. And one of them includes design systems are limiting and restricting. Sometimes there is a particular or unique scenario that a specific component has to be created. Now, even in this case, when you feel that as a designer, there are some unique components that probably are not in your design system, or having it to stick with your design system alone doesn't necessarily give you that desired output. Still, you need a design system, because what that does is when creating that component, you've created and you've solved that problem. But what happens after? What happens when someone else is working on the project? What happens when you yourself come to that project after, let's say, 2 weeks, and you need to like work on new features or upscale the product? There is going to be lapses in the knowledge and the memory of when you created that component and when either you or a new person is using it. Hence, a design system structure has to be created. Now, this is done by creating that component, documenting that component, and testing it out to your team in order to check through some of the basic accessibility guidelines to be able to actually ensure it passes, and this component or this new structure or this new molecule layout is accepted and can now be reused. Design system also kills designers' creativity is another major myth. And now the nature governing design system implies that the process of designing using such systems will consist of merely putting some design components already together to like form bigger templates. But the fact is that design system offers independent components for users. This makes you actually not worry too much about the little details, low level details like spacing, border radiuses, paddings, stroke width, and text fonts, text sizes that are pertaining to specific components. This time it takes away from those decisions, gives you more time to be able to ensure specific design related decisions are actually taken. Now, this doesn't in any way reduce your creativity, but this just gives you basic building blocks and shells for you to be able to use, utilize upon, and focus on more important tasks like the UX side of things, the user experience side of things, and um, basically the flow and the design thinking aspect of things. So it kind of gives you the shells to build and still lets you use your own creative juice in order to assemble them. So no matter how you say it, there are always going to be blocks made. In every construction company, you get to see your blocks are always molded the same. But the way it's arranged in order to give you that your structure is different. That still boils down to the creativity of the architect and the civil engineer. But it gives you spares you that time of trying to create your own cement and mixing it for every building block you want to make, and gives you that consistent feel. Another myth is that design systems are not suitable for big companies. Some companies will argue with you and tell you that every product they will own or they work on is unique and they are not truly two identical applications. However, these products could be indeed different, but as long as it's one company has a brand, and that is one major aspect that most design systems kind of actually lose to fake or kind of ignore to focus on, is that a brand and a voice is actually very important in every design language. So now every brand has its own feel, its own voice, and its own characteristics that are already known and identified with that brand. Now, what the design system does is that it helps you maintain that brand feel across your UI components that can be used across your products. Now, this doesn't affect the way your products will be built, but this affects the way your product will be consistent in order to maintain that design language. There are a lot of companies that actually use similar design systems across like multiple products. One of them is the Atlassian. Atlassian has one of the widest range of products I've seen amongst like a lot of companies. Maintaining that, but if you look at any Atlassian product, you would, if you are someone who has used Atlassian a lot, you'll be able to know this is an Atlassian product. Just because of that design language is consistent. You would hear of teams like Google that they can work on some rapid prototypes and ship out products in 2 weeks. Now, when you look at Google My Business, you look at Gmail, they do not look alike. You would know that, oh, they are different products. The design thinking, the design directions are different, but they have the same feel. You would still identify that this is a Google product, this is Gmail, this is Google Map, this is Google My Business, because of that consistent design language. Then lastly, design systems are not a one-time product. It's not something that you just build and keep and feel, oh, okay, now I'm done with the design system and let me move on to the products. Your design system is equally a product. That's why you get to hear a lot of companies nowadays are trying to hire a design systems designer. But are you experienced in design systems? Because they need someone or a group of people to maintain and manage their design system. Because as much as a product grows, the design system grows. The design system is fast growing in order to match up with the expectations of the users and in order to be able to maintain that structure for both the developers and designers. So updates based off new additions have to be made every given time in order to ensure that there is a consistent cut across feel across the entire product. Now, what the design system comprises of? A design system in general comprises of your pattern libraries and your style guides. So a pattern library is a collection. It's a collection of user interface elements which are made available to use for most recurring design problems. While a style guide, now these are the two differences. A style guide is a set of principles that define the standards of writing and content design throughout the product, as well as the overall visuals of the product. These can comprise of things like your colors, your typography, your iconography, and much more. So they are kind of two different things. You can look at the pattern library as more of like your component resources. Then your style guide as that initial documentation of those basic building shells. Now, a pattern library in broader context is a part of the design system that holds different elements that have been approved by a team of creators and are available to be used within this design systems environment. They vary in size and complexity, and they can be single minor elements, just like an input text field, or a multiple grouped element, just like a navigation bar. Single element or a molecule. Every element in the design library serves as Lego, which is part of a bigger picture or a template or a page. And they are basically smaller components that are used to build a bigger structure. Um, some sectors of a pattern library, basically, you have the title. The name of the component or pattern should be short, straightforward. Or some low-level elements can easily be named in direct manner. For example, you have things like buttons, very direct, very consistent. Anybody that sees this is a button, he knows what a button is. It can be something like text field. It can be something like radio button. It can be checkbox. Very short, very clear. Remember, your design language is has to be clear in terms of communication between yourself and the developers. Now, a description. Every component has to have a brief description of what they do and what they're all about in terms of functionality and how the components actually to be used. Now you have your usage and principles, still based on documentation. You have your variations. This is where design variants come in, whereby for these components, there are other variants or states for these components. And this ought to be designed as well. So the whole goal of this is to have as much variants, as much components as possible. So when designing, all what you are more focused on is using what has been designed into building the solution that needs to be provided. And lastly, you cannot finish up a design system without the coding aspect of things. Just like a product does not end on Figma, a design system doesn't end on Figma. The code has to be implemented in order to meet the naming structure of the design. So it can easily be reused on the developer aspect of things. One good thing about a good design system is that when there is a clear design system, even as a developer without a design experience, you can actually be able to implement some basic pages and some basic design solutions and still maintain a design language just because some building shells have actually already been set in place. So these are a little glimpse of what like a design system for a pattern library is all about. So for here, you can see some things like some cards. Now these are dashboard cards that are reusable. Now, if you notice, they have the same film, they have the same text, large, small text, large text, small text, large text, the same kind of spacing. You have your cards, you have your tables, you have your charts, you have your images. All these are basic building blocks that make a pattern library. Now, going to what a style guide is. A style guide is a number of policies that govern how each part of it should behave on its own and in accordance with other design system elements. These rules indicate how a component should be laid out, how they should look, how big it needs to be, what colors work when it's in default state, that the alternate colors. They could also tell how a component should interact with the neighboring components or the components that surround it. These are guidelines that highlights the standards of branding, design, typography, colors, icons, and as these are just to name a few of the basic building blocks. The whole goal and ultimate purpose of every business is to establish a good online presence, which would connect to their audience and communicate the brand and business goals to the customers that they serve. So the style guide has to maintain that structure in order to have that consistent feel across the business sector. So, sectors of your style guide, your colors, your typography. I'm very sure we know what colors are. Your voice and tone. Now, every brand, like I said, has its way of communicating its ideas to the audience. And this voice and tones are actually necessary in how the business is actually to be viewed. Now, there are things like how um how capitalizations are being used, how punctuations are being used, how exclamations are being used, even down to how emojis are being used. In you see some products that, like Apple, for example, Apple give you this matured, classy feel in every product. You see some products that work with things like emojis. They give you this subtle, playful, welcoming feel. You see some products, like some fashion products, that gives you this sense of class. They have some different kinds of serif typographies. Now, all these are all voice and tones that your style guide kind of sets in place for your design system. Iconography as well too. Now, there are basic brand guidelines on how iconographies are used. For example, you can state that you want to use a stroke icon for um, default states. I want to use a stroke icon with color for an active state, or you want to use a field icon of that same icon library for an active state, or you want to use, for example, you're working on, let's say, a dashboard. You want to work with a place that has maybe an icon that is meant to define what that card is all about, and you want to use a field icon on a background color. So all these little guidelines and documentations are what to actually ensure that consistent feel in your iconography, and in general your design system from your style guide is actually maintained and can easily be reused. Your imagery as well is one major aspect of your design system. Now, imagery, when I say imagery, I talk about the use of pictures or illustrations, whether you're using real world pictures, whether you're using illustrations, or whether you're using a blend or a mix of two. All these have to be decided in your design system. Now, for example, there are situations whereby you can be working with, let's say, an error state, and in your design system, you already have that component that has the error illustration for your emoji, for your the error illustration for that particular or a general scene, and some maybe basic default text. You can just do is pick it up and reuse it. And basically that has saved you the time of thinking about the sizing, the spacing, the size of probably the model, and the way the layout is ought to be about. So that kind of mitigates that thinking stage within your design process. So things to account for, you need to account for accessibility. So there are two major accessibility checks, and that's the section 508 and WCAG 2.0 compliance. Now, I rarely use section 508. My major focus is usually on WCAG 2.0 compliance, and that basically helps you check your general accessibility of the product with major focus on contrast checking and design for inclusivity. Is your design accessible to everybody? Is your design taking into account for people that are disabled? Is it taking into account for people that probably have some form of blindness? Is it taking into account of people that probably have visual impairment, blindness, some basic physical impairments, maybe hearing problems? Is it taking into account all those things? Those things can actually be defined within your design system. Then you also design your components with reference to where those where your designs will be hosted. For example, if it's a native or a web hybrid, if it's a desktop app for Mac or Windows, if it's a mobile app for Android or iOS, these, or if it's somewhere that is going to be used in all, if it's a cross-platform system, all these have to be accounted for before actually creating your design system. Is your design system going to be used in products that will be responsive? Is it mobile? Is it tablet? Is it desktop? Are they large screens? Is it 4K screen? Is it a mini watch? All these actually come into play while actually creating your design system. So other factors to include your software context. You cannot simply design what you want. You have to take into account all the softwares that you have presently in the market. Just like the UX principle of stick with the user convention as much as possible, because users spend 90% on other people's platforms than your own. So the goal is to make them use your product or make your product work for them and not make them. Second thing is that you have to actually account for your users. Who are your users? Are they bank tellers? Are they old people? Are they software experts? Are they Gen Zs? These actually play a long role in how your components, your structures, and your colors should be used. So how to go about my system? The first thing I usually do is identify your components checklist. Now, there are different ways of identifying what your product actually needs. And the first and the most important way is actually work with an MVP kind of mindset. Now, check up to 25 components that you feel are important to include in your first version of your design system. Remove two sections that you feel are unimportant and add like an important star on, let's say, five components that you expect to for you to put like extra effort in it or extra attention based off of complexity and importance. So there's a tool I usually use to check like for design system checklists, and the name is, I usually just type design system checklist. Design system checklist. So you can see I've opened it. It's something I usually go through. So here just helps you get like a checklist of the basic shells that you need in a design system. So first of all, you can check out your design language. All these are just text. This gives you your brand language, the vision, the design principles, the tone of voice, how to actually structure your logos, the guidelines. So you can just check this off and say, okay, I have done this. It's checked off. I have done this. It's checked off. This just gives you a guide while creating your systems to know, okay, how far you've gone and what you need to do. So you have your design tokens. You can actually check out, oh, your color. Have you done the accessibility checkers? Have you done your functional colors, your dark mode? Are you doing the dark mode? Your unit, your grid, your breakpoint, spacing. So all these are all, you can check it out. All these are all checklists that will be necessary for you to be able to structure out a design system. Now, design your components from scratch. One of the main goals of having a good design system is to ensure that they are designed at a given period of time and are designed from scratch. Because while designing things from scratch, most times it gives you the ability to actually have the, first of all, that are in vector format, you have the SVG versions instead of, let's say, like a PNG screenshot that you took from your system, from your maybe existing product. Because most times, in order to start a good design system, especially for an existing product, you need to take a mood board of your existing product. That deals with you taking screenshots of everywhere or every major component, every major molecule, every major pattern in the product, and try to like recreate it. So without having this built from scratch, you cannot necessarily have that CSS. You cannot generate the CSS from it, basically. So yeah, talked about this, cut your components from the various interfaces, organize and print out screens of your existing sites, create categorized sections, and generate, and this exercise basically generates momentum and brings clarity and basically trims fat, reduces unnecessary structures in your existing design. So the first conclusion of the design system is it's not worth noting that a design system is not an end project, but it's an ongoing process. A well-constructed design system will save your software and your team a lot of time in order to maintain consistency, make time and effort dedicated to the process of building the design system. It's a successful investment because when you get to think about, for a designer, for example, while working without a design system, a well-structured design system, even if you are the only designer in the team, you get to, for every building block, you get to create those components from scratch. Now, for example, there is a change that needs to be made and cut across the system. I've worked on products that, on a particular product that I had over 1,000 screens, and we needed to make an update on the product. Now, the update was as little as changing the typography and changing the buttons. But this thing took me almost 2 weeks to go through everything one by one. It was a frustrating, it was a tedious process because everything had to be done one by, and it was not still accurate because there are a lot of times where you get to miss some components. Then when you are dealing with things like prototyping, once one breaks, that's the end. You have to start searching for every component for every component, every state, every interaction in order to like find the root source. Especially probably if I changed one component in one place, maybe change the look, I'll have to change for every single thing. So that kind of reduces that cluster and gives you that level of speed. So now a design system is not necessarily complete without a design token. Now, design tokens are a way to actually make your design system easier, to be easier used and easier scaled. Now, design tokens are variables needed to construct and maintain a design system. Your spacing, color, typography, object style, animation, all represented as data. This can represent anything defined by the design. A color as an RGB value, an opacity as a number, an animation as a Bezier coordinator. Like when you open your Smart Animate, you see those curves, that thing that looks like a curve with handles. Those are all Bezier curves. You can easily just manipulate them manually to be able to get your animation values. They are used to place hard-coded values in order to ensure flexibility and unity across all product experiences. So, how is the current situation of a design system and how they are used across the product? So, designers are responsible for taking design decisions, obviously, updating the color and any font or your core style, and seeing the results in a number of whatever platforms that should be effortless for them. Unfortunately, this is not usually the current case because let's say a color needs to be updated, the designer has to update the color. The design update is shared with the developers. The developer needs to update the code. After the developer updates the code, the designer can now see the result of this update in the development environment. What happens is that the workflow suffers from several pitfalls. The designer depends on the developer to see the result of the core style update. It slows down the design process, it makes the whole process tedious. Updating the color in the code base might be something that is not very time consuming when you have to update maybe a single style variable. However, the time taken to do this change is less time for the developer to actually do any meaningful work. Now, since we are always keeping track of projects, this project or this task has to be updated on, let's say, your product management tool like Jira, and that implies probably another ticket to be created and another task to be done. And this is usually stress because most times nobody really wants a new task. And the time usually used to create a task, approve a task, and set the task probably in the next sprint would have bought you enough time to actually have made that update in a quicker way. And that is what design tokens can actually do for you. So the old entire workflow is optimized using design tokens now. So now a designer can update the color in a design tool. He can use these updates and probably personally ship it to GitHub, depending on the tool that your company is actually working with, and it will automatically be updated. Now, a pull request can be created, and this can be merged on the dev end, and your repo is actually updated with the new colors or the new font sizes or the new text sizes, basically ensuring that consistent design feel, saving a whole lot of time and resources on both design end and so differences between your regular variables and tokens. So for example, visual design properties like color can be stored as normal variables, something like this. You have maybe your blue 400, blue 100, you give me the hex code. But the variable blue, let's say 400, can be used in a CSS processor. And while helping you attain the structure, this has some downsides because variables don't necessarily bridge the gap between naming and the use. Designer needs to know what options that they should apply, in what context, and that is where tokens come into play. Tokens give you the ability to show decisions and to show states. So, for example, instead of having something like blue 400, which is just a random color, you get to have something like button CTA background color blue. Now, this is more descriptive. This is clearer for anybody that sees it to know, that knows that, oh, this is for the button, which is a call to action. The background color is blue. Now, this name of this token makes it clear to actually maintain a clear communication between yourself and developers. So, for example, this is a color. You have 00, a blah blah blah. In your system, this is actually stored as a green 500. But when it's being tokenized, you have things like CTA background color or background outline color. This gives it better context to what it is used on, the state, and how it is being used. So you have something like this now that shows the entire breakdown. So this is the category. The category is a column. The background, that's the property. The container, the surface. The primary, now these are the variants, primary, secondary, whatever. Then the hover state. So you can be hover, disabled, default. So basically, this just gives you a rough shell of a proper naming convention that variant actually helps you with. So for example, now I have this. This is a container. Now this might be a bit confusing at first, but can always do more explanation on it. So this button now, for a border, I can have this button as button CTA. It's at the default state, border column. So now I give it a border color. If it's for a field, I give it button CTA. Instead of border, I give it background. That just lets me know, oh, this is an outline button was a field button. Same thing probably if I want to adjust the padding left. You get to see padding left, your padding S for small, depending on your naming convention. So small spacing is given to your left pad, your left padding. Border radiuses, however you want to actually do it. I might not do too much on this, so it doesn't really get as confusing for the non people that don't necessarily like have little experience with code. So now this is for your default state, this is for your hover state. It's still basically the same thing. Just like you have here, when you have your state, it's actually reflected in your design token naming. So here you have, instead of your default, you have here as your hover. So now, what do tokens actually do? We'll come into like a more in-depth look at it later. So tokens allow for flexible designs. They are used to place hard-coded values that allow designers create more functions and provide a way for designers to maintain complete control over the values in their system. They create a unified look and they help simplify the development processes. So tips of managing a design token: define a good naming convention. I think this is something that has to be reiterated because once there is a clear and constant naming convention between the developers and designers, it helps build better communication and it saves the time of trying to explain your design ideas or the design decisions within the component before the developer actually implements. So a recommended approach is having your category, your type, your item, your state. I think you can follow this basic approach. You should be very good to go. Now, adapting meaningful skills. Now, this is one of the basic building blocks of a good style guide, and that's spacing. So just like you have your regular spacing where you get to put 16 pixels, 24 pixels, adapting a skill that communicates easily between the design language makes it easier to scale. So there's something called like the t-shirt sizing method where you get to have your extra large, small, medium, large, XL, XXL, which usually works with progressions of however you set it. It can be a 2 scale, it can be a 3 scale, it can be a 5 scale. This helps you give more meaningful skills that can be translated into your design decisions. So for example, okay, this is a screenshot I took. For example, a good token documentation has a good description. Now you have your color, you have your description. It tells you this light blue is 5% of the primary tint, blah, blah, blah. It gives you a description. It gives you your token value. The color, primary, this is the lightest shade. or color parameters is the default shade. Then you get to run it through, check your contrast checker. Now there's little secret about this. You don't necessarily need to start um, maybe bothering your head about the different scales or different number values based off the accessibility checker. You can always just run it through contrast checkers like colors and get to see if it actually scales or works. So I would go through Figma a little bit so we can actually get to see um, some ways in which this can actually reflect on our designs. So can everyone hear me?
Yes, can hear. That's kind of awesome. Yeah.
So for example now, all right. For example, I think one of the most resourceful design systems. Can you see my screen? All right. So you get to see things like the design documentation. Now, this basically gives you an introduction to like what Microsoft is. This is what is included in the design system, how they are used, how to use the kit. It gives you now. If you check the design system now, the main component guide, you get to see the layouts, you get to see documentation on it, the decisions taken, and how they're actually being used. For things even as little as your avatars, it gets to show you the avatar sizing, the presence, how it's the avatar would actually be used or where it to be used, the do's and don'ts. So for everything in your design system, without the documentation, you can't necessarily know the design language and how they're actually going to be scaled. So now, for example, I create a component here. So I create a component. Let's say I text it, let's say get started. Clicking on Shift A just basically gives this, makes it into an auto layout with paddings. Now, working on your probably your scale, you can be working on the 2-point scale. You can be working on the 2-point scale. Just basically tells you multiples of 2 with having your 2 at the foundational shell. 2 for, let's say, the next one you have 16. You have 2 for 8, 16, 32, 64. 64 times 2, 112, like that, like that, like that. So basically, those are just your rough scales. So I can give this maybe a padding of 16, height of 16. Maybe I can give this a 2x, maybe 32. And this is already a button. Now, having this your button, for example, let's give this a bloom. I can maintain these different buttons having different let's say your primary case, your secondary case, and this can, with a good system, this can always be reused. But I don't think we would have enough time to actually work with how to use component, how to use variants, and how to actually structure them out in your design. So we actually work with the time we have. But while combining this, let's say as variant, combine as multiple components, with Figma now you can get combined as variants. I can always take this out and properly name them. Now remember this. Let's say button, whatever I deem fit. But like I said, we don't really have that much time because I just checked the time and we're a bit behind schedule. So I'll leave the call and give us the opportunity to actually ask questions. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
All
Yeah.
right.
So
Okay.
I say thank you so much. That really detailed walkthrough on design systems, what it entails, and really, I'm not sure how very detailed this, and I think a lot of us will testify. Thank you so much for being so detailed and thorough about. Yeah. So big behind schedule. So let's see if we can use like 5 more minutes to address a couple of questions. So if you have questions, and just shoot. Let's see if we can do like three. Just drop it in the chat. Then I see.
Okay.
Asking, so Shego, you talked about different states. What's the difference between nothing and none? I said, so when you were talking about different states for components, and you have like active state, and you have a nothing and a non-state, what's the difference?
Okay. If I get the question right, the person is asking for like the various states while designing a component, right?
Yes, but majorly the difference between nothing and none. There was a state you called nothing and a state you called
Okay.
none. So
Okay. Most of all,
yeah,
all right. Go on. Go on. Go on. Finish up.
yeah, that's a different state.
All right. So um let's look at let me try and break it down as easy as possible for you to understand. So when you have a component now, let's say your non-state now is the presence of, let's say, like an empty state in that, or an empty scenario for that particular component. So for example, I'm working with a text field now. So my nothing state now, I can have probably that text field having no action in it. It's just going to be your placeholders, and there's nothing actually active. It's just having your text and your default placeholder, and no action has occurred on it. That's your nothing state. But for your none now, not all elements have a non state. Not all components have a non state. So your none can probably be maybe the absence of maybe particular elements in a text field. So for example, I have a text field that deals with things like icons and text, like your password. So there can be states whereby there is a presence of an icon, and there can also be a state whereby there is no icon. That is like the non-state for that particular text field, like the non-state of an icon in that text field. I don't know if that makes sense.
Okay, I guess that answers your question. If it does, just let us know. A couple more. So the next question says, yes, it does. So what's your best practice for creating a design system? Is it to be done twice UI design, the design? Because you are saying before starting, should you create a system, or during your design process, that's when you create a system?
Okay. So while starting up your design is the best time for me to actually start up your design system, because your design system is just like a product. It's never it's never complete at the initial stage. It's a work in progress. Now, creating it at the start gives you that basic design language for you to be able to kickstart your product. Now, for example, your buttons, your typography, your spacing, you need those basics in check. Now, as the design progresses, whereby you start of some new icons, some new components, some new molecules, you get to update the design system.
with those new updates in your design. So it kind of goes hand in hand. You start it off before the design, but you keep updating it as the design grows.
All right. So just to add, I think I'll just use a couple of seconds to just add. So what I doing a redesign for. So one thing that will help you starting out is look at that are currently being used in the product. So that's an idea of possible components in your redesign. You start own components for your own system. So okay, we have a question that says, so we'll take two more questions and we're done. So once open source design systems and UI key.
Okay. So personally myself, I'm very lazy in terms of some things. Now, using an open source design kit, reusing an open source design kit, I would not advise, because you are just basically copying that UI kit. Now, what that does is that gives you the same brand language, the same feel as whatever product you copied from. But using that design kit as a guide to help you pattern yours, I do not have a problem with it. I actually feel it will save you a lot of time, because you can get to actually have identify from a standard, let's say UI kit that's already scaled. You get to see some things that you're missing and get to also build it out yourself. Now remember, the naming convention is one very important thing in every design system. So if you just say copy Microsoft design system, now the naming convention that the Microsoft engineers are using might be a bit different from what your company is using. So that will bring a lapse. Using it as a guide, just like you have your normal products that you get inspirations. Yes, using it as an inspiration is good, but copying it, I might not necessarily advise it.
Okay. So discussion. So someone okay, just to into this. So do you use up down like that come out? If I do you down approach for creating design system? If that's a thing.
Okay, if I under designers get to bring a lot of terminologies, but if I understand what you are asking for, down up or up down, like building probably from the molecule level, from the atom level down to like the more complicated patterns and reusable templates, or building from that template structure down. Personally, I build from the component structure, from the basic components, your basic style guides, down to your patterns and your more complex patterns that now probably become your templates. So I build from that scale, if that's what the person is asking about. I build from that structure, basic structure or basic building block down to the more complex templates. Okay, it means mobile or web first. Okay, so I try to do it side by side. I try to do it side by side. But in terms of sometimes, depending on time on my hands, if we are starting with, let's say, the mobile or the web, if it's an app, we are starting with the mobile app, I'll get to structure out the component for the app first. But if it's a, let's say, a web product, it's advisable to work with mobile first. So I tend to design out for the mobile, then scale it up to the website of things.
Okay. All right.
But if
So
it's dashboard, if it's a dashboard, I usually break that convention. Now that is me. I might be wrong. But it's very stressful to design a dashboard in mobile first before now scaling to web. It might not be the right practice, but it depends on the complexity of the dashboard. But for basic dashboards, let's say like crypto dashboards, I try to just do web first, scale it down. But maybe things like fintech, I might start from the mobile perspective of things.
from King, this says, do you require design system for every project, even if it's just a small project?
No, you don't require it for every project. You only require it most times for large projects or projects that have, or maybe companies that have multiple projects. So let's say you're working on um, whatever. Let's say it has a rider app and it has a user app. Those are already two products. You would need a design system to ensure that scaling and consistency, because the devs that might be working on the design for the mobile app are different from the ones working on the rider app. So you need that consistent guide across everywhere.
All right. I say thanks so much. Okay, I have question should be from me now. So, how convention to use for your system? Do you look at what your developer currently creates one and they have to follow with that?
Okay. One of the reasons why tokens actually became a thing is because there was a bit of miscommunication between design and implementation. So now the best way is to work with a communication that both of you understand in terms of what developer understands and what you can actually understand and work with. So, for example, in Figma, I might use primary slash, let's say, color slash primary slash button. That convention, I would have to work with something similar in the coding aspect of things by giving maybe something like color dots, maybe primary, then your semicolon, and I give you like the hex code. So it's with a language both of you understand. All of you have to actually come together before starting to establish a communication and a naming convention. But your naming convention should take into account your states and your decisions for making those tokens.
Okay, thank you. Final one. This guy is begging. Shagun says, what part of the system, whose job is it? Huh? Or developer?
Okay, the code part is actually to be faster in scaling. The designer can actually work with it. Personally, I used to write my own design token codes, but I found a plugin not so long ago that actually makes it easier for everybody. Now, when you write your code, it's not necessarily like writing your JavaScript or everything. It's just basically writing your CSS. And CSS is actually very easy to write. It's just like English. My CSS now, I can have something like background color. Let's say background color. I usually work with camel casing. Background color, you just give your code and whatever. So it's actually not so difficult. But most times, there's a plugin I found, and a friend actually shared it, and it's called Figma Token. Now, what you do with Figma Token um, is that it helps you define your tokens and convert it into a JSON file. So, for example, I have this now. I can say I want to create a new set. Let's say, let me duplicate this. So now I say, okay, what is my new set? The new set I want to use is for a color. So I give this color, let's say I call it color dot primary. Color dot primary. I give the hex code 0047cc. Remember to give it your hash, otherwise it doesn't really reflect it. It's code, so it has to be followed properly. I give the description. Let's say I give it primary color. Primary color. I create this. I can create on that one. Let's say I can call it color beige. I give the hex code, let's say F5, F6, FA. I give the base card. I create. I can create maybe spacing. So I can call this S for small. I can give my small spacing as maybe I start my spacing scale with 8, an 8-point system. I create it. No, I did not give it. Small space. So yeah, I've created this. Okay, no, I made a mistake. That was actually for size, but it actually still works. Size, space, the same thing. So what this now does is that I can actually come to my JSON file, and this has already been created into a code format that can be exported from it. Now I can connect this directly to my GitHub. So all I just need to do is add my GitHub repo, and whatever I do here gets updated on my GitHub immediately. And that update can actually become a pull request that the developers can actually merge to the CSS repository and actually update the code directly from there without necessarily having to come and start changing things one by one. I already have everything here that can easily be updated. That's why you need to have that standard naming convention. Now, I can also update this. Let's say I update it. Why are they not giving me a feedback state? I can update it and I can decide to, okay, I think it's broken today. It's not actually not updating my Figma. Let's see, let me create a new state. Let me just call this base. Let's call this for base. Let's just give it a new color. A new size, let's say large. Add value 16 pixels. So once I do this, I don't know why it's not updating. The button is actually not pressing on my file. What it just basically does is that once I actually update this, it actually gets updated on my Figma without me having to actually create it from scratch myself.
Wow.
Then I can always export this. So I can either download this personally and to be stored in my system, and I can always open Visual Studio Code to work on it, or I can just export it directly to GitHub from here. And everything is actually done with ease.
Okay. Right. So thank you so much. That really a whole lot. That would really save a lot of time. So I don't know, how can we get access to your slides? How convert something we can you
Okay, I'll I'll try and export it as a PDF and probably send to you. Then you can share to anyone that needs it.
okay. So thank you so much, Ice. It's been one couple of minutes of love soup.
Yeah,
Thank you so much. I've
yeah.
learned it. And I
The
like the way
topic
it keeps things professional, really. Like, wow.
kept saying what?
It's things very, very professional. So I level stuff that was down. So thank you so much. That's why you're boss now.
I beg.
All right, guys. So we are drawing the curtain at this. So I says it would export the presentation slides, and I don't know that I'll get us on Twitter and also those of us in our WhatsApp group. Then also I want to use a couple of let us coming up Saturday also same time. So that event came up as a result of a conversation that was going. I think I said that up on Twitter what designers should organize their files. So you need to know how to arrange your files so developers can easily find stuff. So they don't have to know if you're having multiple versions of same possibly different ideas. So you need to address that challenge on how to structure your file so your developers can easily find what they need. Your stakeholders can easily come on your design and without requiring your help can easily understand, get whatever information. So we're having that session same time with Laura. So she's going to be helping us with that. Set the event on our Friends of Figma page. So just okay, possibly let me see if I can drop that here. So I'll just drop the link directly. Before you leave, you can just see if you just register so you don't miss. It's going to be very, very insightful, and I have persons who have reached out already, and even of that, so I'd like you guys to be part of that also. So I'll just drop the link. The link to our upcoming event happening on Saturday, same also. So try and be there. It's really, really going to help you a lot to organize your files on Figma. So at this point, so before you leave, just take time to read the link, or just click on the link to read. But if you've done that already, thanks everyone for showing up. Nice to have you guys again. Thank you guys so much, and 1 hour plus. I was really hooked, like from the beginning till the end, and really got a lot of back. All right, guys. I find a way to get across to guys on Figma. Peace out.